Hello and welcome to my show. Today I have with me Karthik. He is the founder of a mental health initiative called Driveway Devi, which we will be learning about shortly. But before we begin, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about him. He is not just an educator, but he's also very deeply involved in art and has now taken up this new role of becoming a mental health advocate for people in India. Welcome, Karthik.
Shankar, thank you very much for having me. And before I introduce myself, can I just extend deep gratitude to you for having me and Driveway Devi on your show, and that I'm an ardent admirer of your work, not in the least because you seem to address themes that aren't necessarily everyone's cup of tea, but deserve attention and discourse. So thank you for your work. As far as I'm concerned, I think I see myself as a constantly evolving individual. And so, as somebody who's been entrenched in the arts, I have trained in Hindustani classical music. I teach communication skills. And for the past couple of years, I have been trying to champion mental health. And Driveway Devi is the name of my wife and mine mental health initiatives platform, under which we have identified 3 or 4 specific areas in which we do work towards improving mental health, reducing the stigma associated with it, and spreading psychoeducation.
Karthik, when I heard about Driveway Devi, the first question that popped up in my mind was the name is so unique. Is this an NGO? What does this do? So, if we could start with the very beginning. What is Driveway Devi? What inspired you to come up with this name? And if you could talk a little bit about how your initiative is functioning currently.
Let me answer your second question first because it's got the less complicated answer. It's not an NGO yet. Having said that, I feel that we don't always have to have a label or strictly define necessarily the work that an individual or an organization is doing. We are very much a non-profit or a not-for-profit initiative. Now, to your first question, my wife and I wanted to do a small event in remembrance of my late mother-in-law, Professor Sadhna Mishra, who was a Delhi University professor. Unfortunately, she took her own life. But anyway, we wanted to mark her life, which was a very socially engaged and active one, with a small event. It was decided that we would do an art show to save money on venue costs. We decided to host the art show literally in the driveway of our home in Jaipur, in India. And because thematically it was a celebration of women and the female form, in that most contributing artists from across the country were themselves women and were painting various interpretations of women, we decided to call the art show Driveway Devi. Somewhere along the line, while promoting the show, we were contacted by an increasing number of women, particularly from Jaipur, who started telling us things they had probably not told a soul in their lives. We realized that something very, very significant had been inadvertently started, and we therefore decided to convert Driveway Devi from being a standalone art show to a permanent and ongoing mental wellness initiative. And because the name embodied all the sort of fundamental principles and values that we would have liked to have associated with the name of an organization such as this. And because our own backgrounds in marketing and advertising clearly told us that it would always be a conversation starter, it became a no-brainer.
Firstly, thank you for sharing such a personal story with me. And I'm very sorry about your mother in law. But, something great has come out of it. And I'm sure you feel good about that. And your wife feels good about that. It's a beautiful name. It has a lot of meaning. And I want to talk about the challenges. You don't have a formal psychology degree. Your wife does not have it, but you have so much more experience. Like, I know you're a Dune School graduate, you've studied music, you're an educator. Do you face a lot of pushback from people when you are promoting this initiative? And what were the initial challenges you faced, when you were trying to help people?
Let me very quickly set up a context where we are working primarily in 3 areas. Number one, we want to increase or enhance both quantitatively and qualitatively, the very, very deficit discourse around mental health in India, particularly in mainstream media. That is the first and foremost mandate, which is why we regularly engage with mental health practitioners and quote unquote regular, normal, everyday people in discussing various facets and aspects of mental health. Number two, there is a certain amount of psychoeducation because there's still a terrible lack of awareness of some very fundamental issues and things associated with mental health. We do this through interventions such as panel discussions that we curate and execute at various schools, colleges. There are certain modules that we've designed which enhance communication skills through inducing a very definite sense of empathy, both in writing and speaking. And then the third area is a certain amount of fundraising. But these fundraising events are always standalone and they have things to do with one performing art or the other, whether it's movement or singing or painting, and money that is generated from these events after a certain amount of due diligence is given to an individual or an organization doing legitimate on-ground work in the mental health space. Funnily enough, the pushback or the challenge is much less to do with the fact that Anuja or I are not psychologists or don't have a psychology background. The challenges present themselves in two ways. One is that, particularly in our bridge service, which I failed to mention just now, which is essential to the work that we do, we act as a bridge between people in distress and connect them with appropriate mental health professionals who are ethical, well qualified, suit their specific type and genre of distress at a price point they can afford. In that kind of service, what we find is that the challenge more is to actually convert that person who contacts us from just staying with us to actually going and seeking that consultation, that very first consultation with the mental health professional. It's really like wanting to restart the gym after a significant amount of time. It's that one first push, but that's really the most difficult. And that reluctance is therefore a number of reasons.
Can I stop you for a minute just so that I don't forget? The question just popped up in my head. You said that you play the part of bridging the people who are distressed with someone like basically professional help, right? And then you said the biggest challenge you face is at this stage where you want to introduce them to professional help, but they are scared to do that. My question is, if they're scared to do that, what gave them the courage to come to you? And what are they trying to get out of you and your initiative? Because I feel like both, even though you're a bridging service, I'm sure that you're doing a lot of counseling, and you and I have spoken about your own personal experience as well. So you're not just a bridging service, you're also doing a lot more than that. But what are they getting out from you that they're scared to approach the professional help?
Prishanka, that's a very good question and a very relevant and appropriate one. I think what's happened over a period of time is that because I have been teaching for approximately 12 years, a bulk of my teaching is individual, it's one on one. Most of my students, suo moto, have confided in me about various things, their hopes, fears, frustrations, aspirations. The more senior kids even speak to me very openly about confusion and conflicts regarding their sexuality, leanings, etc. Now, this is something that has become fairly commonly known, particularly in our own city. And a lot of the content that I've been making for my own teaching social media endeavors points to a image where I am perceived as a quote unquote quasi counselor therapist. And I think it is out of that sense of comfort that a lot of these people initially get in touch with us. It's absolutely understandable. Having said that, what they perhaps don't account for is that we are not professionals, and therefore there are people more qualified than us to be giving them the kind of tools and techniques and advice and support they need for serious mental health conditions.
Yeah, no, and that makes total sense. I, being Indian, came from the belief that, oh, going to a counselor, psychologist is basically just wasting money. You can go talk to about these things with your family or your friends. But I do see the value now going to a therapist and also encouraging anybody who's having any sort of low moment in life to just go talk to someone, get medication if needed. It's just like any other health issue.
Rishanka, if I may quickly
Yeah.
add one more very significant point. See, when we put out communication to potential target audience that we do act as a bridge service, we actually don't necessarily articulate in every piece of communication that, hey, we will connect you with a professional. The communication tends to be more in the space of, if you're feeling distressed, reach out to us. So it's not necessarily their fault. They probably also perceive us, and me especially, as somebody whom, for a very finite period, maybe even one interaction, at least can come and vent and just expel that baggage and then sort of move on. But in that interaction, it is fairly obvious to me that that particular individual can immensely benefit from a longer, more sustained engagement with a professional.
Then I totally agree with you. I think since you've done this for so long, you kind of know exactly when to refer someone or not, right? So, actually, let's talk about that. Let's talk about a day in your life being a mental health advocate. What does it look like? What does operations look like? What is your marketing, advertising strategy? Where do you begin? And while you're talking about that, I also want to know your conversion rate. I know I'm getting into the statistics right now, but I just want people to see that there are other people just like them who are actually reaching out for this kind of help. So if you could just tell me in a month, how many people are reaching out to you and what is your strategy? I'm sure it's different with each person, but an overview of your strategy would be helpful.
Absolutely. Typically speaking, my day tends to be divided, wherein the first half of a day is primarily dedicated to Driveway Devi activities, and the second half of a given day until evening time is teaching. Now, within that construct, the first half tends to be further subdivided between a couple of meetings that are planned. These are usually video calls with potential guests for our now long running ongoing dialogue series called Driveway Devi Talk Therapy. So there is a couple of meetings for that where we get to know each other and we consultatively decide possible themes and talking points for the final recording of the interaction. There is at any given point certain amount of follow-ups that are taking place on average for a couple of individuals whom we have connected with mental health professionals. So, and by follow-ups, I mean a follow-up both with the client or the individual who had reached out to us, and in certain cases, depending on the situation, even with the mental health professional, particularly in cases that are a little more severe. Now, here I must quickly add another layer to this, because I shared that a lot of these individuals do come in with a certain amount of trepidation in terms of seeking professional mental help in the first place. They need some kind of hand holding because it comes extremely easy to them, for no fault of theirs, that if they have one first meeting with ex-therapist and they don't get a sense that it's gone well, the tendency of completely abandoning that pursuit is very high. And so the sort of orientation and sensitization with simple ground realities, that finding a good therapist or a therapist who works for you is pretty much like dating, and you must sort of persevere and mentally prepare yourself to find the one who's working for you and settle down with him or with her, is a process also that we tend to handhold the people who get in touch with us on, because we don't want them to forsake that endeavor right at the very outset. So those are also the kinds of follow-ups that take place. The third thing that happens is planning of some form or the other of some kind of intervention, which is usually to do with a psychoeducation endeavor or an event that we're doing. It may be a small to a medium-sized event. What is happening more and more lately is that we are also doing, for example, therapeutic writing programs and workshops across schools, colleges, corporates, and NGOs. So there could be a meeting or two set up for that. We are also trying to get involved with a few edtech companies now where we will be developing actually curriculum for what is called SEL, which is social emotional learning. So there are lots of things. The first halves tend to be divided amongst all of the things that I listed, and the bridge service work that we do locally for people in Jaipur sometimes requires very sudden and emergency intervention wherein I'm physically sort of going at odd hours or at night if the need arises with a particular person to a hospital, etc. But those are few and far between.
So, apart from you reaching out to people, what are the other ways people can reach out to you if they need help? Is email the best way, or like how do they do it?
So it's stupidly simple, Rishanka. I'm completely and fully accessible through WhatsApp, through email, through phone call. It's all out there in the public domain. In fact, all of our bridge service clients reach out to me personally in that very manner. On average, in a given week, I receive 2 to 3 requests or contacts for sort of counseling or related activities.
That's progress for India, I think, because no one even spoke about mental health a few years back. So that's
Absolutely.
great that you're able to change so many lives. Karthik, we've spoken so much about being a mental health advocate and your process, but I want you to explain to the audience because you've had so much experience with so many different people. When does a person really need help? Because a lot of us have low moments in life. We all go through ups and downs, and it could just be a small phase and you could get out of it. How do you know you're not just overreacting and you actually need professional help or counseling? What is that pattern that you're seeing in people, which is common?
That is possibly the most tricky $1 million question, but the most pertinent and important one. Please understand that in a lot of situations of extreme psychological distress, there is immediately a sense of loss or losing objectivity that takes place. So I'm not trying to sort of spook anyone or scare anyone. I'm merely laying out the facts on the table because that is a tendency and there is a propensity for somebody who is suffering from depression or other conditions to lose that sense of awareness of the self. Please understand, selfish as it sounds, to always invest in certain relationships and certain people you surround yourself with, even if it's just one or two, even if they're from within the family or close friends, who will call you out and not just be yes men, because they are the ones who will act as, for lack of better description, psychological first aiders. Now, so that is one very critical thing to sort of keep in mind. And I say this with a lot of responsibility and with a lot of personal lived experience, because post my own cancer treatment, when my mental health went absolutely sort of down the barrel, it was my partner, my wife, who actually told me, showed me the mirror because I was completely clueless. So that's that. Now, when do we press the panic button is a bad sort of phrase, but when do we see this as a cause for concern, cause for probably involving wisely a professional medical person? There are two broad areas. Number one is time duration. Now, please understand that we often misconstrue, and particularly in today's contemporary world, we've started using terms like depression, OCD, very casually, very loosely in everyday parlance. That's really sad because these are all serious conditions. Understand that stress, like cholesterol, there is good stress, there is bad stress. Similarly, if you're simply feeling sad, that does not necessarily mean that you're depressed or anxious, because it is perfectly quote unquote normal for any human being to experience the entire gamut of emotions. I say time duration as the first factor because depending on the usual tendency of a specific individual and how long he or she typically feels sadness in their everyday lives, if that time boundary is being breached, and not just breached, it's being breached by a week, 10 days, or 2 weeks, and there is continued sadness, and it feels as if there's very, very gut wrenching sadness, then there is cause for concern. So, number one fundamental is time duration. Number two, similarly, is intensity. Level of feeling that particular emotion and how much it is overwhelming you also is a determining factor that will help you decide whether to seek help or not, because it is one thing to feel a little down and take a nap on a given afternoon, but again, time after time, morning after morning, if you find yourself so debilitated by that feeling, by that sadness, that it is preventing you from literally getting out of bed and doing chores that you normally do, which are very, very instinctive and pretty much on autopilot, like brushing your teeth and bathing, etc., then again, there is cause for concern. So I think without complicating it too much, focus on these two aspects, time duration and intensity.
Got it. And Karthik, I do want to talk to you about one or two more things before we close this episode. There's so much stigma around mental health issues, whether it's schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever it is that's related to mental health. Can you give a practical piece of advice to someone who is going through an issue or a family member who can help their dear ones, and they can use this advice immediately to make their lives better and handle that issue well?
Yeah. That's also a very, very important question, because sometimes, because we are so invested in that individual and we're so desperate to help out, we can overreach. We need to be aware first and foremost that we are limited in the kind of help we can extend, because we don't necessarily have the scholastic and intellectual knowledge to do that beyond a certain point. Now, with that understanding, also realize that in most scenarios that are non-emergency, and hopefully one has spotted it before it snowballed to that situation, really all that individual wants and needs is to feel heard and feel the presence of you. Because the first thing that tends to happen is either a truth, an accurate, or a perceived notion of complete isolation. So that is what you want to first and foremost address by purely and simply demonstrating that you are there no matter what, no matter when. And from there on out, depending on your specific dynamic with that individual, you can cautiously, politely, sensitively build up to a suggestion of that person seeking professional help, something that you can offer to literally and physically organize, accompany, etc. And if one is not enjoying that kind of equation or dynamic with that individual, then of course you can do it the other way around, where you can go to the mental health professional, express what you're noticing and observing, and it can be worked backwards. Now, very important here to underscore that with minors, if there are teachers who notice things at school, or even if you're an older sibling who's noticed something unfortunate and disturbing and worrisome in a younger person, please go straight away to any person in a position of guardianship to that particular individual, whether it's a parent or a grandparent.
That's great advice, Karthik. Thank you so much. As we wrap up, if you could ask the audience to do just one single thing after listening to this conversation, what would that be?
Please invest time in yourself. Now, I mean this in two ways. In a 24-hour cycle, because of the very, very busy lives that we tend to inhabit and lead in a modern contemporary world, we seldom have the privilege of spending time with ourselves. So even if it is literally just 10 minutes or 15 minutes, shut up, shut down, and shut out the rest of the world. And by rest of the world, it includes family, spouse, wife, partner, child, etc., and spend that time with yourself. It can be on reflection, it can be listening to music, it can be playing something, it can be doodling. That's almost immaterial as long as you spend that dedicated, non negotiable self time in a 24-hour cycle. And if you can, please again invest in yourself in terms of a slightly deeper excavation and investigation that will bring you greater self awareness. This again comes from a tragic human insight where an overwhelming majority of people, and this is a global phenomenon, mind you, are leading lives in pursuit of things, of careers, of vocations, all of which put together are making them woefully unhappy and discontent. There may be very healthy bank balances, but true inner contentment is not something that many of us can stake claim to. And at least getting on a path towards that contentment, which ultimately liberates you psychologically and emancipates your mind, will come from an investigation of the self and what you really want out of life.
Wow, that's a very, very powerful message to end the episode with. Karthik, thank you so much for your honesty, for your work, and for sharing your personal story about your mother in law. Thank you so much. And if you did enjoy this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. If you or a family member is suffering from a mental health issue, please feel free to reach out to Karthik, who is a mental health advocate and runs the initiative called Driveway Devi. He is available on WhatsApp, email, Instagram. I'm going to put all his contact information in the description section below. So feel free to reach out to him. Until then, this is Rishanka Jones signing off.